I'm like nervous.
Tell the audience that you don't know what you're going to do. The cameraman's going to challenge you.
I'm being challenged by our cameraman. I have no idea what's coming. So I guess we're just going to run through the MCU of what I disliked and what I really liked.
What is the funniest movie in the MCU?
Funniest movie in the MCU is Thor Ragnarok, hands down. And Thor Ragnarok actually has the most, it has the two best Thor movies in it. The first one is the start of the movie. It's the most Thor-like movie we've had so far. The opening sequence with Surtur is like golden. We see Thor using the hammer like he does in the comics. He's spinning it around. He's using it as a shield. He's fighting Surtur. He's in Muspelheim. He fights a giant fucking dragon. It's just, it's the most Thor movie we've ever seen. The rest of the movie is kind of like a separate movie, but it's again another enjoyable Thor movie, and that's easily the funniest MCU movie, I think. I think they realized on the set of Ghostbusters that Chris Hemsworth is actually super funny and can do comedy, and Taika Waititi came in and nailed it.
Which MCU film is the best action film out of all the MCUs? What has the best action in it?
They're all pretty action-y. I would say it's probably a bit of a toss-up, but the Russo brothers who directed Captain America Winter Soldier, Captain America Civil War, Avengers Infinity War, and Avengers Endgame had incredible action sequences. In terms of like the best chase scene, the chase scene in Captain America Civil War where the government's chasing after Bucky, Cap's chasing Bucky, Panther's chasing Cap, Falcon's chasing Panther. That whole sequence was incredible. The airport fight sequence in Civil War was a great fight. The Avengers Endgame fight was a great fight. I would say definitely something the Russos did across those four movies. I'd be hard-pressed to pick a favorite. When we get to the end scene of the first Avengers movie and the portal opens up and all the aliens are spitting out, the Avengers finally assemble for the first time, the camera pans around them, it's like I'm getting goosebumps just thinking about it. It was everything I didn't know I wanted to see in a movie. And then the rest of that fight scene, that's probably actually the best action scene in the MCU. Is everything that came after is fantastic and everything the Russos did was great. The initial invasion of New York scene from that first Avengers movie is probably the best action sequence in the MCU. You can disagree, but I mean, I'm getting goosebumps thinking about it. The music, the emotion, it was incredible to kind of see everybody assembled for the first time. We had never seen that many superheroes gathered together. And then that fight scene was the biggest superhero fight I'd ever seen at that time.
Like, what was the most emotionally relevant Marvel film?
The most like emotionally like charged scene in the MCU is there's two that I think for me still when I rewatch these films or these shows that really kind of get me. And the first one is ironically when Thanos throws Gamora off the cliff to get the the soul gem. That I thought was a really kind of touching scene, and I thought I was like, wow, like they're making me care about this fucking lunatic murderer who just killed his own daughter to get, more power. That was very emotionally charged. When Captain America is standing alone against Thanos and the whole army, you're just kind of like, guys, he's dead. He's gonna die. There's no way he can do this. And then Falcon calls him on the comm and everything, and all the portals open up, and that was the closest thing I'd ever seen to mimicking that first Avengers end sequence where it was just like the music was perfect. You were super pumped. And the audiences, I've never heard anything like this ever. I saw the movie multiple times in theaters, and every single time we got to that scene where Falcon said on your left and the portals opened up, I've never heard so many people collectively losing their minds all at one time. It's one of the nice things about being a comic fan. Going to see these movies opening night is you're almost always sitting in a theater full of comic book fans, and we're all there for the same thing. And when those scenes happen in the movies, it's like it's this just shared communal, incredible experience where everyone is losing their minds at the same time. Captain America picks up Thor's hammer, which they'd been teasing since the first Avengers movie. We all knew it was coming. And the way they did it was just perfect. It was just a close-up shot of the hammer, and you just see the hammer get lifted out of frame. But Thor's unconscious. Thor's been beaten by Thanos, so it's not Thor lifting the hammer. And I'm just like remembering it and just like blown away. They just did such a good job of nailing it. It's something from the comics that everyone was kind of waiting for. We all kind of knew was happening, and it still blew people's minds when they did it.
What movie are you, out of all the properties announced, 20 or whatever,
yeah,
what are you looking forward to the most?
So out of everything that's announced so far, the thing I'm looking forward to the most is Thor Love and Thunder. The Thor movies, the first two aren't great. I was very, very excited for Thor when it was initially announced. He's one of my favorite Avengers, but he's probably the hardest Avenger to nail. I thought we were going to get like a combination of like Superman meets Lord of the Rings, and it wasn't either of those things. Until Taika Waititi came along and did Thor Ragnarok. The trailer for Thor Ragnarok was probably one of the greatest trailers I've ever seen. I remember watching it, and the music was perfect. The visuals were great. When Hulk shows up, I was like, lost my mind. So I think the next Thor movie, Thor Love and Thunder, it's the one I'm most excited for because they're adapting a lot of Jason Aaron's run on Thor. The villain in that movie is going to be Gore the God Butcher, who's an incredible villain Jason Aaron created for his run. But more importantly than that is we're getting Natalie Portman coming back as Jane Foster. In the comics, Jane Foster becomes Thor, and it's incredible run in the comics, and they're going to do it. And I was shocked that they were able to get Natalie Portman to come back. I don't think she was super pleased with those first two Thor movies she did. She sat out the third one. She came back very briefly for Avengers Endgame, but that was a deleted scene from Thor the Dark World. So that movie is what I'm most excited for. The return of Jane Foster, and Jane Foster taking over as Thor I'm gonna lose my mind.
What do you think the best Marvel film is in terms of being in terms of being a film? What is the best film?
Yeah.
What's the most well-constructed
I
film?
think the most well-constructed Marvel movie is probably Captain America Winter Soldier. It was more of a political thriller than a superhero movie. All the characters in that movie are really, really good characters. They got great actors to play these characters, and then there's stakes in that movie that are more grounded than some of the other films. You know, Ant-Man's fun. It's a good heist movie. There's a lot of cool stuff in it. There's a lot of interesting stuff with like the shrinking, but the villain was crap. Winter Soldier's a phenomenal villain. The relationship between him and Captain America, it's a great relationship in the comics, and they did a phenomenal job of adapting that story to film.
What was one film you wish hadn't been made?
Iron Man 3 is... Everyone takes a dump on Thor Dark World, and they're right to. It's not the best movie, but Iron Man 3 is probably my least favorite Marvel movie. I like stuff in Iron Man 3. There's a lot of really cool stuff in it. I like the twist with the Mandarin. Everybody hated that, but I actually thought it was cool because the Mandarin's not that interesting of a character, and he's super racist. Iron Man 3 it just didn't work. They were doing some very interesting stuff, dealing with the Tony Stark having post-traumatic stress disorder from the events of Avengers. This was one of the first movies we got after Avengers, so going into it, there was a lot of expectations in terms of like, what was this gonna look like? And I think they spent a lot of time of Iron Man not being Iron Man. They spent a lot of time with this weird little kid in some town in Tennessee. It was set during Christmas, which was super weird. Shane Black is obsessed with Christmas, and all his movies take place during Christmas. I'm not a big fan. There was some cool stuff in Iron Man 3, but overwhelmingly, I think that's my least favorite MCU movie.
What if they messed up the most in the Marvel universe? So it's like either the portrayal of a character.
Yeah, absolutely. The biggest beef I have with the MCU is Hawkeye. Jeremy Renner's terrible. I don't think he's a very talented actor, but it's not entirely his fault. The movies haven't done much with Hawkeye. We'll see if that changes with the upcoming Disney Plus show that's scheduled to come out in a few months. But the characterization's all wrong. And again, that's not necessarily Jeremy Renner's fault. That's actually Robert Downey Jr.'s fault. Robert Downey Jr. came into Iron Man and redefined how that character is written. Robert Downey Jr. played him snarky. He's a smartass. He's giving all the other Avengers a hard time. That was Hawkeye's job. That's how Hawkeye interacted with all the Avengers. He's the guy giving everyone lip and picking fights with all the other teammates. They didn't give much for Jeremy Renner to do, and then they further compounded that by giving Iron Man more of the personality of Hawkeye from the comics. So Hawkeye's he's one of my favorite Avengers, and he's my least favorite Avenger in the movie.
Nice. Is there anything they did better in the MCU than was done in the comics?
Things that they've done better. Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man is better than Tony Stark in the comics. I liked Iron Man in the comics. You know, again, I'm a big fan of the Avengers. I follow these books pretty regularly. But Iron Man didn't have a big personality in the comics. And Robert Downey Jr. came in and kind of redefined how that character's approached, so much so that he's now written in the comics like Robert Downey Jr. plays him in the movies. It's the thing Marvel gets right most frequently is casting. Jeremy Renner being an outlier in terms of poor casting. Robert Downey Jr. as Iron Man, perfect casting. I can't imagine anyone else playing that role. Chris Evans as Captain America I initially thought was a terrible idea, and then he knocked it out of the park.
So what are you least excited?
I think the MCU property I'm least excited for is the What If series they're doing. It's not that I don't think it's an interesting idea or I don't like. It's based on the What If comic books, which is a line of comics I really thought was cool. I'm just not excited as much as that for the other stuff because it's almost like it doesn't matter. It's outside of the main continuity. It's going to be more of like, what if Black Panther got abducted by Yondu and became Star-Lord instead of Peter Quill? That's interesting, but I think it's something where I know it won't matter. It's not going to go anywhere. It's just going to be, yeah, what if Peggy Carter was Captain America? That's great, but it's a one-off. We're not going to return to it. We're not going to spend a lot of time in that world. So it's going to be interesting to see because it's animated and it's going to be different than anything else the MCU's really done so far, but it's almost inconsequential because it won't affect the rest of the wider MCU. So if you like this content and want to see more like it, feel free to subscribe below. If you want to follow me over on social media, you can find me on Instagram at @TheBraveButterPecan. If you're looking for more content like this, I co-host a weekly podcast called Caffeinated Comics. You can find anywhere you find your podcasts. If you're interested in any of the titles we've mentioned during this episode, I'd encourage you to support your local comic book store. If you don't know where your local comic book store is, you can go to comicshoplocator.com, type in your zip code, and they'll show you the nearest store.